welcome in now Azlin Ahmad, editor, Crude Oil Markets, Manish Singh, CFA, Chief Investment Officer, Crossbridge Capital, also joining us on the show. Welcome to both of you and thank you so much. Azlin, let me begin by your opening comments on reports that Biden is going to pull the plug shortly. What does it mean in real terms if the United States decides to stop purchasing Russian oil?
I think at this point, they're very, very close. From what I understand, they are set to announce that they will ban Russian crude imports. Okay, I think we have to put it into perspective. US is not a big importer of Russian crude. From what I understand, in 2021, the US only took about 700,000 barrels per day of Russian crude. Now, so in terms of the oil impact, the impact on the oil prices, I think when they announce it, which seems to be quite imminent or quite close, I think that we will see some rise in the crude oil price, but I think we may not see a huge jump. Number one, because as I said, the US is not a huge importer of Russian crude, but also the market has been more or less expecting this over the last few days or the last week that this was going to happen. So I'm sure the knee-jerk reaction is that crude will go up when that announcement is made and it becomes official. But I don't see it like, rising up to like very sharply just yet. I think that the main thing would be if Europe bans. Now that is drastic.
So, all of this talk coming in from Moscow that it would go up as high as $300, of course, this is rhetoric. It happens during war. But do you think that there are options for European nations to reduce their purchase of Russian gas or Russian oil, or they are sort of stuck at this point, which really gives Putin the bargaining chip he wants, doesn't it?
Yes. I mean, I think that...
Azlin, this question again for you.
Okay. In terms of the reduction, I think that there is possibility. What we've already seen is that many of the European buyers, some of the European refiners have already started to reduce their purchases of Russian crude, even now. So even though there is no official sanctions, there is a sort of like a de facto sanction in the sense that a lot of buyers in Europe are just staying away from Russian crude. Firstly, because insurance has risen, it's getting more difficult to find credit and vessels for these cargoes, and also the rising stigma now of buying Russian crude. I think we saw in the last few days when Shell took a cargo of Urals crude, they had a lot of backlash. There was a lot of comments. So companies are already starting to reduce, but I don't think that at this point, in such a sudden, in the immediate term, that Europe can totally cut off Russian crude and gas purchases and gas imports, just because there are limited options. I mean, think about it. Russian crude exports are about 4.5 million barrels per day. 2/3 of that goes into Europe. Okay? And should there be an absolute ban or zero Russian crude exports, there's just not enough capacity to meet that. Or rather, we would basically exhaust all the spare capacity, global spare capacity that we have on crude, which we see at about 5 million barrels at the end of 5 million barrels per day at the end of 2021. So that could be very dire for oil prices. I would not want to predict where the market is. Maybe $300. I don't know. We just don't know where it's going to go. But I think that the chances of a total cut in Russian crude exports at this point might be unlikely, just because there are limited alternatives for the European refiners, with the European buyers, to find the immediate alternatives.
You know, you spoke about Shell, and let me just quickly tell our viewers what Shell has said today. They've pledged to stop buying oil from Russia. They've apologized for their purchase of cheap Russian crude over the weekend, and they've said they will close all service stations in the country and stop current work there. Their company has actually said it was wrong to buy Russian oil. It was not the right decision, and we are sorry. So they are being sort of feeling the heat and being forced to take this step. The question is, after Biden's move, will other countries also feel the need to start cutting down? What does that do to supply? What does that do to markets? Manish Singh joining us as well. Manish, great to have you on the show. If I look at how Wall Street is opened, it's quite tepid. We're not seeing any major moves, fairly flat in opening trade. The Dow Jones just mildly in the red right now, down about 37 points. NASDAQ down about 38 points. So far, I would say it's flat to negative. But do you think that this is going to be a big mover if Biden makes this official statement in a few hours from now?
Hi, Tamana. Good afternoon. Good evening, rather, where you are. What I would say that, as Azlin has mentioned, these moves were very well telegraphed. People were expecting, or people are expecting, that US is going to do things unilaterally, and that's what is going to happen probably when he makes any announcement today or tomorrow. The thing to bear in mind is that a lot of that is happening now does not come as a surprise to many market participants, because we have been expecting this. If there is any surprise, that is down to can Europe really go net zero on Russian oil? Now, this was something that even Russia or Mr. Putin, in his wildest imagination, must have never thought that this is going to happen, or a day is going to come where Europe is going to contemplate. But that's exactly where we are. Can it be achieved? We don't know, because I think it has never been tried before. But is there a willingness on part of Europe to do that? I see a very strong willingness on the part of Europe to do that. And of course, the negotiations are going to go on. Let's not forget that OECD nations, which is where most of Europe are, they always have, or they should have, 90-day reserve of oil requirements. So could this be used as a bargaining chip to say, well, we are going to say zero, but we will be fine for 60 days, and let's see what Russia wants to do about it. So this could be a part of all the negotiating tactics. Are they going to cut down to zero immediately? Absolutely not, because you saw that yesterday in the press conference that Prime Minister Boris Johnson and then Mark Rutte and the Canadian Prime Minister Trudeau had, where Prime Minister Boris Johnson made a comment that Europe cannot cut itself completely. And that was yesterday in what he mentioned very clearly in off-the-cuff remark. But Europe is pursuing a policy by which they will use less and less of Russian oil. And this should be very alarming to Russia, because 40% of Russian revenue, or the whole machine that keeps Putin in power and everything going in Russia, that relies on 40% of that money is coming from oil exports. And if you lose all of that, or major part, 2/3 of that, and if you don't have a buyer, then that has a big concern. So far, it is still looking more of a localized problem, though the reverberation are clearly there in the market. As we say in the market, the cure for high price is higher prices. Ultimately, that's what is going to happen, that it is going to lead to demand destruction. It is probably going to lead to recession, and not oil hitting $200 alone. If it stays there, hitting is one thing. If the price stays at that level for a long time, that's exactly when you have demand destruction and recession. Will we see that? Let's see. I think it's very difficult to say. Things can change very fast, but that's where we are heading. But the market does not tell you that the market is overwhelmingly alarmed about the prospect of oil staying there for a long time.
So, Azlin, you gave us this perspective, but let me just understand this broadly. You mentioned in your earlier comment that the United States does not import too much of Russian oil. So, in that perspective, in real terms today, the bigger fear is that this is a nudge to European nations to follow suit. Is that the right way to understand this?
To some extent. Sorry.
So, is that for me or Tamanna?
Azlan, it's for Azlin. Yes.
Oh, okay. All right. Well, I think that possibly, but I think that what we understand is that initially the US did want to have the cooperation of the US with the EU, but I think they, as Manish mentioned, I think they realized that for the EU or for Europe to cut Russian crude exports, it is just going to be such a drastic move that you could see households. I mean, there could be the impact on crude prices could be very dire. So I think that to some extent, the US has decided that, well, we'll go on our own, but in terms of the US markets, as I said, it doesn't mean that there's going to be an absolute shortage of crude, because that import of Russian oil is just sort of like a drop in the bucket in terms of what the US is producing. So it's more, it seems to me, a lot more of a symbolic gesture, and also maybe to some extent, possibly it is to warn President Putin that, well, this is just a starting point, that we are serious about curbing Russia's extent, and that, well, basically do not underestimate the Western world ability to go forward. So I think that there are a few factors in this, but as I said, it's in terms of the impact, the economic impact, the crude prices, it's not going to be huge for the US. They can probably cover it in that sense,
Okay. Yeah, Manish, you want to come in on that? Yes.
Yeah. So what I was saying that the US can afford to do that, and for the reason Azlan has mentioned that they do not import so much of US crude. Europe has to be very careful. Europe has been dragged into this, and I think it's also down to the public opinion. In Europe, we are in a democracy. When people feel very strongly about what is happening in Ukraine, then the democratically elected government, or who want to get re-elected, they have to follow the mood of the people. And suddenly, and this is what has united the Western world, that the people are completely against this war. The humanitarian crisis and anything that's happening in Ukraine is unbearable and intolerable to the Western world. And it is forcing its leaders in the direction, which sometimes can be risky, but given the public opinion that we have in Western world, and I can say that from living here in London and talking to all my European friends, that Russia will be foolish to underestimate the resolve of Europe in how much they want to get off Russian oil. And therefore, I think people sitting in Russia obviously never thought that this day is going to come, but it is coming. And the negotiations are going to be extremely difficult. I do not know really what the outcome is going to be, because it is anybody's guess at this time. But I think it'll be extremely foolish for Russia to think that Europe is not going to cut a lot of its oil consumption. But one final point I would like to say, I think the way I see this, that this is going to have a major impact on monetary policy going forward, because here you are seeing a taming or neutering of a commodity major right in front of your eyes, things that people never thought. And what does that mean? Energy or commodity will not be used as a weapon to settle score or to cause inflation, which causes problem in the Western world. And that is welcome in the Western world, because Western world is highly indebted. Look at the debt to GDP ratio is extremely high. It will be welcome even by China, who probably would not like to have higher energy prices. So suddenly, having low energy prices benefits everyone, and therefore Europe, following on what it is saying, on US footsteps, looks logical that why they wouldn't do it. Of course, they're not going to harm themselves, but certainly they can see the benefits of following a policy which leads to low energy prices for long term, which means you'll have a far accommodative monetary policy and inflation.
No, one sec, Manish. How would this lead to? No, 1 minute. How would it lead? How would it lead to low energy prices if you're essentially saying that 5 million barrels per day would be cut out of the
Okay,
entire picture.
so
OPEC is
so let
saying we can't make it up.
sure,
Azlin has
sure,
mentioned this as well. So how is this going to lead to
sure,
low energy prices? Very quickly,
sure.
if you can, because I've
Yeah,
run
let
over
me
time, but I really want
yeah.
to clarify this point for
So
viewers.
let me explain again. What I was seeing was a medium term thing. If you look at OPEC, OPEC has been asked to pump another 2.5 million barrels per day by the end of the year. You will the diplomats are going everywhere into Venezuela and Iran, and they're having discussions to bring on more production. You will have shale oil production coming or increased production coming from US as well. So the combined effect of that, and when you see that a major provider like Russia in their production capacity or their selling capacity has been cut because they have behaved in a manner which has not been acceptable to Western world, that sends a lesson, an important lesson to all the energy providers that you cannot just run roughshod and have their own will or form a cartel. And in my opinion, that is a long-term lesson that is going to come out.
Wow.
But that is not for 1 month or 2 months.
I don't
That's
know.
looking at
I
6
don't know.
months, 12 months down the line.
I don't know. Yeah. I don't know. I think that could be up for debate. I think it could be up for debate over who has the upper hand right now and who will blink first. But needless to say, it's a very tense moment and we need to follow the story closely. Thank you so much, Manish and Azlin,
My
for
pleasure.
joining us.